origins. We can go back to the 1972 Stockholm Conference on the Environment and Development. We can go to the Earth Summit of 1992 in Rio and think how far-sighted that was, because at that summit there were three major conventions signed. One was the Climate Change Convention, Framework Convention. One was the Biodiversity Convention, and the other was the Desertification, Combating Desertification Convention. But one would like to say that the last period from 1992 to now, what, 24 years, have been well spent. And actually it hasn't, because the hopes of all the agreements negotiated pursuant to these conventions have really not been realised. And I think the message for young people is, just as the Vietnam was the issue of war was the issue of my generation, and fighting apartheid and nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific, one of the issues for your generation has to be taking on the sustainable development challenge, because otherwise the world we leave to future generations will be nothing like what we see today if we continue to allow our natural environment to deteriorate and poverty to continue on the scale that it's on. Still close to 1 billion people in our world living in hunger in the world actually rose. So we're being very challenged to do the most basic things like feed people, provide water, provide sanitation, and so on. So on these key conventions from 1992, we eventually succeeded in getting the Paris Agreement. A good agreement, an ambitious agreement, and thanks to the huge advocacy from the small island developing states, ambitious to mentioning the 1.5 degree target. The problem is, all of our countries are not doing enough. I absolutely accept the special and differential responsibility for developed countries. My country needs to do more, Britain needs to do more, all developed countries need to do more, but everybody has to do things. And if you add up all the nationally determined contributions which countries have committed to make, it does not get us anywhere near 1.5 degrees. Right? In fact, the latest draft report I saw for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we will exceed 1.5 degrees by the 2040s. That's not so far away. So if we're going to try and reverse those trends, the time is now. We have to act, and your voices are critical of that. There's other research that says on current trends, we have only a 5% chance of not exceeding 2 degrees by the end of the century. Only a 5% chance. So radical action needed to change that. On the current trends, we are careering towards a 3 to 4 degree temperature rise. And I think each of you know what that means for your countries. We know what it means for small island developing states. More intense storms, rising sea levels, low-lying atolls from the Maldives, Tuvalu, Kiribati, some of the islands of Tonga and others, underwater. Not good at all. We know what it means for the drought-prone areas of Africa and South Asia. It means more desertification, more water shortage, more extreme events. So this is not the future we want. And remember, around the global agenda, we always talk about the future we want. We want a sustainable future, where we have water, where we have food, where we have sustainable energy, where we don't have people hungry and living in poverty. But we've got a lot of work to do, and we have to join all the dots across these things. Let me just say a word about biodiversity, because often we focus so much on the Climate Change Convention and agreements, we don't talk about biodiversity. But we have critical issues in biodiversity. We have targets set at one of the major conferences on the convention at Aichi in Japan, targets set for 2020. Well, we're not doing very well on those either. I just checked the latest on that this morning, and they estimate that somewhere around 2/3 to close to 90% of countries are not on track to meet any of the Aichi targets on biodiversity. And you're now seeing the alarming reports around the threat to the insect populations, I've been very involved as an advocate on the iconic African wildlife species. We see habitat disappearing, many pressures. So we've got some issues. So the issues would really take me more than my 6 minutes to go through, but we can elaborate on the panel. But let me conclude by saying this. The key message is that we do have power to change things. And that change should be driven from the bottom up and from the top down. We need voices, we need engaged youth, we need youth communicating with passion on the urgency of these issues. We need leaders being prepared to step up and walk the talk. Now, probably many of you here don't follow the news that comes out of New Zealand the way I do, but there's a very interesting Walk the Talk initiative announced by our young Prime Minister, 37 years old, female Prime Minister, last week. She used to be a junior staffer for me, by the way, so I'm really proud of Jacinda. Jacinda announced last week that the New Zealand government will no longer authorise any exploration permits for oil and gas around New Zealand waters. Defined climate change as the issue for this generation, and so she's walking the talk. She's saying, I can't talk about that and then say, come and explore our waters for oil and gas. So she's made her stand, and she deserves support for that. So that's leadership. We've got the international agreements, we've got the frameworks, we know what has to be done, but we actually need the political will to implement. And that's where I hope you will all come in driving the political will that will make the leaders like Jacinda feel supported when they step out there and do something as significant as the decision I've just talked to you about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clark. And if I have to take 3 things